The crystalline towers of Zephyria Prime gleamed under the twin suns as Ambassador Kethvar stepped onto the diplomatic platform. His forearms moved in the traditional greeting gesture of his people, the Velthari, while his compound eyes scanned the gathering of species before him. Representatives from across the galaxy had come to witness this historic moment, the formal introduction of humanity to the Galactic Federation. Kethvar had served as a diplomat for over 3 centuries, facilitating first contact with dozens of species. He prided himself on his ability to remain calm and composed, no matter how strange or intimidating a new race might appear. The Velthari were known throughout the galaxy for their diplomatic prowess and emotional stability. Fear was not a concept his people understood well. The human delegation approached slowly, their bipedal forms seeming almost comically simple compared to the varied anatomies of the other Federation members. Kethvar noted their pale skin, bilateral symmetry, and those peculiar forward-facing eyes. They moved with a strange grace, neither the fluid motion of the aquatic Nephtai nor the precise mechanical steps of the cybernetic Zulmari. "Welcome, representatives of humanity," Kethvar announced, his voice carrying across the plaza through the universal translators. "I am Ambassador Kethvar of the Velthari Diplomatic Corps. We gather today to celebrate your species' entry into our galactic community." The lead human, a female with short brown hair and wearing simple dark clothing, stepped forward. "Thank you, Ambassador Kethvar. I am Director Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Government. We're honored to join the Federation." Something in her tone made Kethvar's sensory organs twitch. There was a quality to human speech that the translators couldn't quite capture, an undertone that his people's enhanced hearing picked up. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it carried a weight that made him unconsciously shift his stance. As the formal ceremonies progressed, Kethvar found himself studying the humans more intently. They seemed perfectly ordinary, even unremarkable by galactic standards. They had no natural weapons like the razor-clawed Zethnari, no impressive size like the massive Gronthak, no advanced technological integration like the machine-bonded Helix Collective, yet something about them felt different. During the reception, Kethvar approached Director Chen to engage in the customary diplomatic small talk. "Your species has made remarkable progress," he said, gesturing with 2 of his arms. "From what our scouts observed, you achieved faster-than-light travel in an impressively short time." Chen smiled, a facial expression that Kethvar had studied but still found unsettling. The way humans bared their teeth was supposed to indicate pleasure, yet something primitive in his mind interpreted it differently. "We've always been quick learners when we need to be," she replied. "Survival has a way of motivating innovation. Survival." Kethvar's translator rendered the word, but the concept seemed oddly emphasized in human speech. Most species develop spaceflight during periods of prosperity and exploration. Humanity developed it during wartime, Chen said matter-of-factly. "We were fighting ourselves when we discovered the technology. Nothing motivates technological advancement quite like the threat of extinction." The casual way she mentioned warfare made Kethvar's secondary heart skip a beat. In Velthari culture, conflict was carefully managed and ritualized. The idea of species-wide warfare was almost incomprehensible. "You fought your own kind?" "For thousands of years," Chen confirmed, still wearing that unsettling smile. "We've only had global peace for about 50 years now. That's actually one of the reasons we're so interested in joining the Federation. We're hoping to learn better ways to resolve conflicts." Kethvar felt a strange sensation he couldn't identify. His people had evolved from creatures that lived in vast crystal caverns, with few natural predators. The emotion of fear had been nearly bred out of them through millennia of safe evolution. Yet something about this conversation was triggering ancient genetic memories he didn't know he possessed. As the evening progressed, more details about humanity emerged through casual conversations with other delegates. The thermal-dwelling Ignis spoke of humans' ability to survive in extreme temperature variations. The aquatic Depthmari were amazed by human endurance capabilities. Most disturbing of all, the insectoid hive mind mentioned that humans were one of the few species they'd encountered whose thoughts they couldn't read. "Their minds are chaotic," the hive representative had whispered to Kethvar through their telepathic link, "full of contradictions and rapid changes. It's like trying to read a storm." Later that night, Kethvar returned to his quarters aboard the diplomatic station. He accessed the Federation's preliminary reports on humanity, documents he had only skimmed before the ceremony. What he read made his crystalline skin patterns shift to colors of confusion and unease. Humanity had not only fought wars among themselves, but had done so with increasing levels of destruction throughout their history. They had created weapons capable of sterilizing their entire planet, then sat on the edge of using them for decades. They had practiced warfare as both an art and a science, developing strategies and technologies specifically designed to defeat opponents who thought exactly like they did. The report mention something called mutually assured destruction, a concept so alien to Velthari, thinking that Kethvar had to read the passage 3 times to understand it. Humans had achieved peace not through wisdom or evolution, but through the terrifying realization that they could destroy themselves completely. But perhaps most unsettling was a small note in the behavioral analysis section. The Federation's xenobiologists had observed that humans possessed something called an uncanny valley response, an instinctive fear reaction to things that appeared almost, but not quite, human. It suggested that humans had evolved specifically to identify threats that looked like themselves. Kethvar set down the datapad and looked out at the stars through his viewport. For the first time in his long diplomatic career, he felt something he couldn't name. It was as if some ancient part of his mind was trying to tell him something important about these new allies. He thought about Director Chen's smile, the way she had spoken so casually about warfare and survival. He remembered the strength in her grip during their handshake, the calculating look in her eyes as she surveyed the other Federation representatives. There was nothing overtly threatening about her behavior, nothing that violated any diplomatic protocols. Yet Kethvar found himself checking the lock on his door before settling down to rest. For reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted a barrier between himself and the human delegation. Even though they were housed in a completely different section of the station, sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of crystal caves and shadows that moved with predatory grace. 3 weeks after first contact, Kethvar found himself assigned to the Human Integration Committee. The Federation Council had decided that humanity's rapid technological development and strategic thinking would be valuable assets to the galactic community. What they didn't realize was how much the humans were already changing the dynamics of every meeting they attended. The committee gathered in the neutral conference chamber aboard Nexus Station, the Federation's primary diplomatic hub. Representatives from 12 species sat around the holographic table, but Kethvar noticed that everyone seemed to unconsciously avoid sitting directly across from the human delegation. Even the usually aggressive Korthax warriors had positioned themselves at angles that wouldn't put them in direct confrontation with Director Chen and her team. Today we're discussing trade routes through the disputed territories, announced Council Speaker Mordun, his massive Kronthak frame settling into his reinforced chair. The Zephyrian Syndicate has been interfering with shipping lanes again. The Zephyrian representative, a crystalline being similar to Kethvar's own species, flickered their light patterns in protest. The routes pass through our traditional hunting grounds. We have every right to regulate passage. This was a familiar deadlock that had persisted for decades. The Zephyrians claimed territorial rights based on ancient traditions, while the merchant guilds insisted on free passage for essential supplies. Typically, these discussions would drag on for months with careful diplomatic compromises that satisfied no one. Director Chen leaned forward slightly. What exactly do the Zephyrians hunt in those territories? The question seemed simple enough, but something in her tone made the entire room shift uncomfortably. The Zephyrian representative's patterns dimmed. Energy parasites that feed on ship engines. It's not really hunting in the traditional sense, more like pest control. And how effective are your current methods? Chen asked. We eliminate perhaps 30% of the parasites each cycle. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The shipping manifests show that merchant losses average about 40% engine efficiency through those territories. That correlates directly with parasite damage. She paused, looking around the table. You're losing more ships to parasites than to Zephyrian interference. Kethvar watched as the human's simple observation reframed the entire conflict. Instead of a territorial dispute, it was suddenly a problem that required cooperation to solve. What do you propose? Speaker Morden asked. Joint operations, Chen said immediately. Merchant ships carry Zephyrian hunting teams. The ships provide faster transport to parasite concentrations, the hunters get better access to their targets, and the merchants get protected passage. Everyone wins. The Zephyrian representative's patterns brightened with interest. That could work. Our hunters would be much more effective with better mobility. The Korthax delegate slammed his armored fist on the table. It's too simple. There must be complications, hidden costs, territorial violations. Why? Chen asked quietly. The single word hung in the air. Kethavar noticed that Chen hadn't raised her voice or made any aggressive gestures, but something about her presence had intensified. The Korthax warrior, a being bred for combat and known for never backing down from confrontation, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Because that's how these negotiations work, the Korthax said, but his conviction was already wavering. That's how they've always worked, Chen corrected. That doesn't mean they have to keep working that way. Over the following hours, Kethavar watched the humans systematically dismantle decades of diplomatic tradition. They didn't argue or threaten. Instead, they asked questions that cut straight to the heart of each issue, stripping away layers of cultural complexity to reveal the practical problems underneath. When the Aquan Collective complained about atmospheric contamination from industrial worlds, Chen asked for specific contamination data and suggested targeted filtration systems instead of broad industrial restrictions. When the Hive Mind Confederation worried about cultural contamination from increased trade, she proposed cultural exchange programs that would satisfy their need for controlled interaction. Each solution was elegant, practical, and completely obvious once she pointed it out. Yet none of the other species had thought of them during centuries of traditional diplomacy. During a break in the session, Kethavar approached Dr. James Harrison, the human xenobiologist on Chen's team. Your director has a remarkable ability to find solutions, he said. Harrison smiled that unsettling human smile. Sarah's actually our military strategist, not a diplomat. The Earth government thought her tactical background would be useful for understanding galactic politics. Military strategist? The concept sent another of those strange chills through Kethavar's nervous system. Combat planning, resource allocation, threat assessment, Harrison explained casually. She spent 20 years figuring out how to win conflicts as efficiently as possible. Turns out those skills translate well to diplomatic problem-solving. Kethavar tried to process this information. The Federation had sent their most experienced diplomats and negotiators. Earth had sent a warrior, yet the warrior was more effective at achieving peaceful solutions than beings who had dedicated their lives to diplomacy. When the session resumed, a new crisis emerged. The thermal industrial complex was threatening to withdraw from the Federation over mining disputes with 3 different species. It was the kind of multi-faction conflict that typically took years to resolve. Chen listened to all sides present their cases, then stood up. I need to see the actual mining sites, she said. Not reports, not surveys. The actual locations. The thermal representative's skin glowed with irritation. Impossible. Our facilities are classified, our methods are proprietary. Then this dispute will continue indefinitely, Chen said simply. You can't solve a resource conflict without understanding the resources. Something in her tone suggested that this wasn't just an observation, but a fundamental truth. Kethavar noticed that other delegates were nodding agreement, even though they had never required site visits before. Within an hour, arrangements had been made for inspection tours that would have been unthinkable that morning. Each faction suddenly seemed eager to prove that their claims were justified by showing the humans exactly what they were fighting over. As the committee adjourned for the day, Kethavar overheard a conversation between 2 Korthax delegates in the corridor. There's something wrong with those humans, one was saying. They make everything seem so simple. Simple? The other replied. They make everything seem inevitable, like there's only one logical solution and we're idiots for not seeing it. Kethavar realized that was exactly what made him uncomfortable. The humans didn't argue or intimidate. They just presented reality in such a clear way that any other response seemed foolish. It was a form of dominance he had never encountered before, not based on strength or authority, but on the uncomfortable clarity of truth. That night, he sent a private message to his superiors on Veltar Prime. The humans may be more significant than we initially assessed, he wrote. Recommend enhanced observation protocols and psychological evaluation of integration impact. What he didn't write, because he couldn't find the words, was that he was beginning to understand what fear truly meant. The emergency council session convened at 0300 station time, the harsh lighting casting long shadows in the usually warm diplomatic chambers. Kethvar arrived to find the main conference room filled with nervous energy and hushed conversations. The Zephyrian Syndicate had made good on their threats. 3. Federation supply convoys had been attacked in the Outer Rim territories. Ambassador. Kethvar took his assigned seat and watched as the various species representatives filed in. The mood was grim. These weren't random pirate attacks. The Syndicate had used advanced Federation technology, suggesting they had inside information about convoy routes and schedules. Director Chen entered with her small human delegation, and Kethvar noticed immediately that she moved differently. Gone was the relaxed posture of the diplomatic meetings. Her movements were precise, controlled, predatory. Dr. Harrison and the other humans had shifted too, their casual demeanor replaced by something that made the Velthari diplomat's skin patterns ripple with unease. Council members, Speaker Morden began, his massive frame hunched with worry. We face the worst internal crisis in 3 centuries. The Zephyrian Syndicate has formally declared war on the Federation. They've seized control of the Kepler Junction and are demanding recognition of their sovereignty over 6 star systems. The Aquan representative's bioluminescent patches flickered rapidly. This is impossible. The Zephyrians were founding members of the Federation. They helped write the charter that prohibits warfare between member species. Wars happen when one side stops following the rules, Chen said quietly from her corner of the table. Every head turned toward her. The human sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table, but somehow her presence had suddenly become the focal point of the room. This isn't war, protested the hive mind delegate. This is internal conflict. Political discord. We resolve these matters through negotiation and compromise. With respect, Chen said, still in that same quiet tone. Your supply convoys are burning debris in space. Your trade routes are blocked by hostile forces. Your citizens are dying. Call it whatever makes you comfortable, but you're at war. The words hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Kethvar watched as the reality of their situation sank in around the table. The Federation had spent so long avoiding the concept of warfare that they had failed to recognize it when it arrived. What do you suggest? Speaker Morden asked, though something in his tone suggested he already feared the answer. Chen stood up slowly, and Kethvar noticed that every other being in the room unconsciously leaned back. First, we need accurate intelligence. Where are they operating from? What ships, what weapons, what supply lines? Second, we need to understand their actual objectives beyond the public demands. Third, we need to prepare for the possibility that diplomacy has already failed. Diplomacy never fails, the thermal representative said firmly. It's the foundation of our entire civilization. Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes that made Kethvar's secondary heart skip. Diplomacy works when both sides want peace more than they want victory. The Zephyrian Syndicate isn't looking for compromise. They're looking for dominance. They've calculated that the Federation's commitment to peaceful solutions makes you predictable, which makes you vulnerable. That's impossible, the Korthax warrior delegate said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. The Zephyrians are merchants and traders, not warriors. Every species is capable of warfare, Chen said simply. Some just choose to deny that capability until someone else forces them to remember. Over the next several hours, Chen systematically dissected the Federation's response capabilities. Her questions were surgical in their precision, cutting through centuries of diplomatic protocol to expose the uncomfortable truth. The Federation had no idea how to respond to actual aggression. Their military consisted primarily of peacekeeping forces designed to separate minor conflicts, not fight wars. Their intelligence networks focused on trade data and cultural exchange, not strategic information. Their decision-making processes required consensus from dozens of species, making rapid response impossible. You've built a perfect civilization for peace, Chen concluded. Unfortunately, your enemies only need to be perfect at war. Dr. Harrison activated a holographic display showing the galactic sector where the attacks had occurred. Based on the timing and coordination of the strikes, we believe the Syndicate is operating from hidden bases in the asteroid fields of the Kessler system. They've been planning this for years. The precision of the human analysis was disturbing. They had identified patterns that Federation intelligence had missed, strategic implications that hadn't occurred to species with centuries more experience in galactic affairs. "How do you know all this?" demanded the Aquan representative. "Because this is what we do," Chen said. "Humans have been fighting wars for our entire recorded history. We understand strategy, deception, resource management under pressure. We recognize the signs because we've used these tactics ourselves." The admission sent a wave of discomfort around the table. Kethvar realized that the humans weren't just offering to help solve the problem, they were revealing that they were naturally equipped to understand it in ways that no other Federation species could comprehend. "Speaker." Morden's voice carried a note of desperation when he asked, "What would you do?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her words were measured and careful. "You could authorize a limited strike on their primary base, destroy their coordination capabilities and supply depots, force them back to the negotiating table from a position of weakness instead of strength. Strike?" The thermal representative's skin flared bright orange. "You mean attack them? Violence against fellow Federation members?" "They stopped being Federation members when they started killing your people," Chen replied. The room fell silent. Kethvar could see the struggle on every face around the table. Everything in their culture, their history, their fundamental understanding of civilization, was built on the rejection of warfare as a solution to problems. Yet, the humans had presented them with a terrible logic. Their enemies had already chosen violence. The only question was whether the Federation would accept that reality or continue to pretend that peaceful intentions could protect them from those who had abandoned peace. "We need time to consider," Speaker Morden said finally. "Time is what you don't have," Chen said. "Every hour you spend in committee meetings, they're moving ships into position for their next attack. Every day you delay response, they're interpreting your hesitation as weakness." As the session adjourned, Kethvar found himself walking beside Dr. Harrison toward the diplomatic quarters. The human xenobiologist seemed almost relaxed compared to the intensity he had displayed during the meeting. "Your director," Kethvar said carefully. "She seems very knowledgeable about warfare." Harrison nodded. "Sarah commanded a carrier battle group during the Pacific Consolidation War. She's personally responsible for strategic victories that saved millions of lives." He paused. "She understands violence not because she enjoys it, but because she's seen what happens when good people refuse to acknowledge its existence." That night, Kethvar lay in his quarters staring at the ceiling, unable to find rest. For the first time in his life, he understood what his ancestors might have felt hiding in crystal caves, listening to predators moving in the darkness outside. The humans weren't threatening the Federation. They were simply revealing truths that other species had spent millennia learning to ignore, and somehow that was far more frightening than any direct threat could have been. The attack came without warning during the third day of deliberations. Kethvar was reviewing supply logistics in his quarters when the station's emergency klaxons began screaming. Red emergency lighting bathed the corridors as he rushed toward the command center, his forearms instinctively moving in defensive positions he hadn't used since childhood. The main display showed a terrifying sight. 12 Zephyrian warships dropping out of hyperspace directly around Nexus Station. The Federation's premier diplomatic hub was surrounded, its minimal defensive capabilities utterly inadequate against the assault force bearing down on them. "How did they get so close?" Speaker Morden demanded, his massive frame trembling with shock. Commander Talrex of Station Security was frantically coordinating with the few patrol ships in the area. "Their ships are using Federation IFF codes. Our sensors read them as friendly vessels until they powered weapons." "Inside information," Chen said from the back of the command center. Somehow she had arrived before most of the council members, already studying the tactical displays with the focused intensity of a predator analyzing prey. Admiral Kexthor of the Federation Navy turned toward the human delegation. "Director Chen, we have 6 patrol cruisers and 2 escort frigates. They have 12 heavy cruisers and what appears to be a modified battleship. Our military protocols suggest immediate surrender to prevent unnecessary casualties. Your military protocols are designed for peacekeeping operations, not warfare," Chen replied, moving to the tactical console. Her fingers danced over the controls with surprising familiarity. "May I?" Commander Talrex nodded desperately, stepping aside as Chen took control of the station's defensive systems. Kethvar watched in fascination as the human rapidly analyzed the enemy formation, Her movements were fluid, confident like she had been born for this moment. Within seconds, she had identified patterns in the Zephyrian approach that had escaped trained Federation military officers. "They're using a standard encirclement formation," she explained, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Designed to look overwhelming while actually limiting their ability to concentrate fire. They expect you to surrender, which means they're not prepared for actual resistance." "What resistance?" Admiral Kexthor asked helplessly. "We're outgunned 12-8 and their ships are newer models." Chen's fingers moved across the control panel, highlighting specific sections of the enemy formation. "Numbers don't win battles. Tactics do." She turned to face the assembled Federation officers. "Your patrol ships are faster and more maneuverable than their heavy cruisers. Your escort frigates have better sensor arrays. And this station has industrial fabricators that can be weaponized." "Weaponized?" Commander Talrex looked horrified. "This is a diplomatic station. We don't have weapons. You have mass drivers for moving cargo containers, plasma welders for construction, and navigation deflectors that can be overloaded to create electromagnetic pulses," Chen said matter-of-factly. "Everything can be a weapon if you understand how to use it." The first Zephyrian warning came through on general communications. "Nexus Station, you are ordered to surrender Federation military assets and prepare for occupation. Resistance will result in the destruction of the station." Chen activated the station's response channel before anyone could stop her. "Zephyrian vessels, this is Director Sarah Chen of the United Earth Government. You are in violation of interstellar law and are ordered to withdraw immediately." The response was immediate. "Director Chen, your species has no authority here. Stand down or be destroyed along with the rest of these Federation cowards." Kethvar saw something change in Chen's expression. The diplomatic mask fell away completely, replaced by something cold and calculating that made his primitive instincts scream warnings. "Admiral Kexthor," she said quietly, "I'm going to teach you how humans fight wars. Follow my instructions exactly and most of your people will live through this." What followed was unlike anything in Federation military history. Under Chen's direction, the patrol cruisers didn't engage in traditional combat maneuvers. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, striking at the edges of the Zephyrian formation and disappearing before return fire could be coordinated. The escort frigates used their superior sensors to provide targeting data, allowing the station's improvised weapons to hit enemy ships from unexpected angles. Mass drivers launched cargo containers filled with industrial explosives. Plasma welders created interference screens that confused Zephyrian targeting systems. "This is impossible," Admiral Kexthor whispered as they watched two enemy cruisers collide while trying to avoid a debris field that Chen had created from scrap metal and navigation beacons. "We're not winning. We're making them defeat themselves." "That's how humans fight," Dr. Harrison said from beside Kethvar. "We don't just try to be stronger than our enemies. We try to be smarter." The battle lasted only 43 minutes. When it ended, 7 Zephyrian ships were disabled or destroyed. 3 had retreated in disorder, and the remaining 2 had requested permission to surrender. Federation losses consisted of 1 patrol cruiser with minor damage and several cargo containers. The command center was silent except for the quiet hum of systems returning to normal operations. Every Federation officer stared at the tactical displays in disbelief. "How?" Speaker Morden finally asked. Chen was already shutting down the improvised weapon systems and returning the station to normal operations. "They expected you to fight like Federation members, honorably, predictably, with minimal collateral damage. They prepared for the war they wanted to fight, not the war that actually happened." "But the casualties," Admiral Kexthor said. "Hundreds of Zephyrians died. Thousands of Federation citizens were going to die if this station fell," Chen replied. "War isn't about minimizing casualties. It's about ensuring that the casualties happen to the other side." The brutal pragmatism of the statement sent a chill through every being in the room. Kethvar realized that the humans hadn't just saved the station. They had revealed the fundamental weakness in Federation thinking. The assumption that everyone shared their values, that everyone wanted to minimize harm, that everyone could be reasoned with. Over the following hours, as rescue operations began and damage assessments were completed, the full scope of what had happened became clear. The humans had not only defeated a superior force, but had done so using principles that other Federation species found deeply disturbing. They had turned the enemy's expectations against them. They had used deception and misdirection, They had sacrificed enemy lives without hesitation to protect their allies. They had fought to win rather than to achieve moral superiority. That evening, Kethvar found Chen standing alone on the observation deck, looking out at the debris field where the battle had taken place. Emergency recovery ships moved between the twisted metal remains like fireflies in the darkness. "Does it disturb you?" he asked. "The destruction?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Every death in war is a failure of diplomacy," she said finally. "But sometimes diplomacy fails not because peace isn't possible, but because one side has already chosen violence. When that happens, the choice isn't between peace and war, it's between victory and defeat. Your species has a very different understanding of these concepts than ours," Kethvar observed. "Yes," Chen agreed, "and that's what makes humanity valuable to the Federation. Not because we're more violent, but because we understand violence well enough to end it quickly when it becomes necessary." As Kethvar returned to his quarters that night, he realized that his understanding of fear had evolved again. It wasn't just the humans' capacity for violence that was frightening. It was their absolute clarity about when and how to use it. They didn't enjoy war, but they were perfect at it. And somehow that combination was more terrifying than any simple aggression could have been. In the aftermath of the Nexus Station battle, the Federation found itself facing a crisis that no amount of diplomatic protocol could address. The Zephyrian Syndicate had revealed themselves as an existential threat. But more disturbing was the realization that the Federation's entire philosophy of governance was fundamentally unprepared for actual conflict. Kethvar sat in the emergency assembly hall watching as representatives from 43 species debated the unthinkable, formally authorizing military action against former Federation members. The arguments had been going on for 6 hours and no consensus was emerging. "We cannot simply abandon our principles because of one crisis," declared Ambassador Veltana of the Serenity Collective. "If we resort to warfare, how are we different from those we fight?" "Because we'll be alive," Chen said from the human delegation table. Her words cut through the philosophical debate like a blade through silk. The hall fell silent, every pair of eyes, optical sensors, and sensory organs focused on the human representative. With respect to the distinguished delegates, Chen continued, standing slowly, "You're debating whether to defend yourselves against an enemy that has already declared war. This isn't a philosophical exercise. It's a survival situation." The Thermal Collective representative's skin flared orange with agitation. "Survival does not justify abandoning civilization." "Civilization doesn't survive without defenders," Chen replied. "The Zephyrian Syndicate isn't going to stop because you disapprove of their methods. They're going to continue attacking until you're either dead or subjugated." Speaker Morden's massive frame shifted uncomfortably in his oversized chair. "Director Chen, surely there must be some diplomatic solution. Some way to resolve this without resorting to your methods." "There is," Chen said. "Surrender. Give them everything they want, accept their terms, and hope they honor whatever agreement you reach." She paused, looking around the room. "How has that approach worked in the past with species that have chosen violence over negotiation?" The question hung in the air unanswered because everyone in the room knew the historical precedents. The Korthak conquest had ended only when the aggressors had overextended themselves. The Voidwalker raids had continued until the affected species had finally armed themselves. The Plasma Lords had negotiated treaties they broke whenever convenient. Admiral Kexthor stood at his military briefing station, looking exhausted. "Our latest intelligence suggests the Syndicate is preparing for a major offensive. They're massing ships at 3 staging points, coordinating with mercenary groups and recruiting from disaffected populations across 12 systems." "How long before they're ready?" asked the Aquan representative. 2 weeks, possibly less," the Admiral replied. Chen activated her personal data pad and projected a holographic display that filled the center of the assembly hall. It showed a detailed map of Federation, space with red markers indicating Syndicate positions, and likely targets. "This is what's going to happen," she said with the same calm certainty she had shown during the station battle. "First wave hits the industrial worlds in the Kepler sector. They need resources and manufacturing capability. Second wave targets communication hubs to isolate Federation response. Third wave goes for population centers to force political surrender." The precision of her analysis was disturbing. She had identified the exact strategy that Federation intelligence was still trying to understand. How do you know this? Demanded the hive mind delegate. Because it's exactly what I would do, Chen said matter-of-factly. Limited resources, time pressure, political objective of forcing surrender rather than total destruction. This is the most efficient approach. Dr. Harrison stood beside his director, adding his own holographic overlay to the display. We've run simulation models based on historical human conflicts with similar parameters. The syndicate's approach matches classical insurgency to conventional warfare transition patterns. Kethvar found himself studying the human analysis with growing unease. They weren't just predicting the enemy's strategy, they were thinking like the enemy. The same minds that had saved Nexus Station were revealing their ability to plan destruction on a galactic scale. You seem remarkably well prepared for this analysis, observed the Crystalline Coalition representative. Humanity has fought hundreds of wars, Chen replied. We've been the insurgents and the established power, the attackers and the defenders, the desperate and the overconfident. We understand warfare not because we're violent, but because we've made every possible mistake and learned from all of them. The assembly fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans weren't just offering to help fight the syndicate. They were demonstrating that they understood conflict on a level that other Federation species couldn't match. Speaker Morden finally broke the silence. What do you propose? Chen gestured to the holographic display, highlighting specific systems and trade routes, preemptive strikes on their staging areas before they can coordinate the offensive. Disrupt their supply lines. Force them to defend multiple positions simultaneously. Make them react to our timeline instead of following their own. That would require attacking first, the thermal representative said. Initiating hostilities against beings who have not yet acted against us. They've already acted, Chen said firmly. They've declared war, attacked Federation installations, and killed Federation citizens. The only question is whether you're going to fight on your terms or theirs. The debate that followed was unlike anything in Federation history. For the first time, representatives were forced to grapple with concepts that their species had successfully avoided for millennia. Preemptive warfare, acceptable casualties, strategic deception. The humans didn't argue or advocate. Instead, they presented scenario after scenario showing how traditional Federation responses would lead to defeat, subjugation, or massive civilian casualties. They demonstrated that the choice wasn't between war and peace, but between controlled conflict and uncontrolled destruction. You're asking us to become something we're not, Speaker Morden said finally. I'm asking you to become something that can survive, Chen replied. Your current approach works perfectly in a universe where everyone shares your values. Unfortunately, that's not the universe you live in. As the assembly recessed for private consultations among the various species delegations, Kethvar found himself walking with Dr. Harrison through the station's diplomatic quarters. The human xenobiologist seemed almost relaxed despite the crisis unfolding around them. Your director, Kethvar said carefully. She makes warfare sound almost inevitable. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. Sarah doesn't believe war is inevitable. She believes that those who understand war are responsible for preventing it. The problem is that prevention sometimes requires demonstrating that the cost of aggression is too high to be acceptable. And if the Federation refuses to authorize military action, Harrison was quiet for a moment. Then the Federation will cease to exist, he said simply, and humanity will need to decide whether to honor our alliance with a dead civilization or focus on our own survival. The casual way he discussed the potential dissolution of a 1,000-year-old galactic government sent chills through Kethvar's nervous system. The humans weren't threatening to abandon the Federation. They were simply acknowledging the logical consequences of choosing philosophical purity over practical survival. That night, Kethvar lay awake thinking about the evolution of his understanding of fear. First, he had feared the unknown qualities of humanity. Then he had feared their capacity for violence. Now he was beginning to fear their absolute clarity about the nature of reality. They saw the universe as it actually was, not as they wished it could be. And somehow, that unflinching acceptance of harsh truths was more terrifying than any weapon they might possess. Outside his viewport, Federation ships continued their normal patrol patterns, maintaining an illusion of safety that everyone knew was about to be shattered forever. The vote was closer than anyone had expected, 22 species in favor of authorizing military action, 19 opposed with 2 abstentions. For the first time in Federation history, a resolution had passed that explicitly sanctioned warfare against fellow sentient beings. Kethvar watched from the observer gallery as Speaker Morden announced the results. The massive Krontak's voice carried the weight of 1,000 years of peaceful tradition being abandoned. By majority vote, the Federation Council authorizes Operation Starfall, preemptive military action against the Zephyrian Syndicate terrorist organization. The use of the word terrorist was itself significant. The syndicate could no longer be considered a legitimate government or even a rebellious member state. They had been formally redesignated as an existential threat to galactic civilization. Director Chen stood as the session moved to operational planning. Speaker Morden, members of the Council, humanity is honored to assist in this operation. However, I want to be clear about what you're authorizing. She activated the main display, showing detailed star charts and fleet positions. This isn't going to be a police action or a peacekeeping mission. This is war. People are going to die, ships are going to be destroyed, and decisions are going to be made that will haunt some of you for the rest of your lives. The blunt assessment sent a wave of discomfort through the assembled delegates, but Chen continued without pause. The enemy isn't going to follow your rules of engagement. They're not going to respect civilian installations or honor surrender requests. They're going to fight for their survival using every dirty trick and desperate tactic they can devise. If you want to win, you need to be prepared to be just as ruthless. Admiral Kexthor stepped forward to the strategic planning console. Director Chen, the Federation Navy stands ready to follow your tactical recommendations. Our preliminary assessment shows we have numerical superiority in most ship classes. Numbers are irrelevant, Chen said, manipulating the display to show projected battle scenarios. The Syndicate has been planning this for years. They've chosen their positions, prepared their defenses, and they're fighting for everything they believe in. Your ships are crewed by beings who have never experienced actual combat. Dr. Harrison joined Chen at the console, adding psychological profile data to the tactical analysis. Federation military doctrine is based on overwhelming show of force to discourage conflict, not sustained combat operations. Your crews are trained for peacekeeping, not warfare. The implications were stark. Even with superior numbers and technology, the Federation military was psychologically unprepared for the kind of conflict that was coming. What do you recommend? Speaker Morden asked. Joint operations, Chen said immediately. Human tactical officers on Federation ships, Federation crews under human command structure during combat operations. We provide the strategic knowledge. You provide the resources and manpower. The suggestion sent a ripple of unease through the council chamber. What Chen was proposing amounted to humanity taking operational control of Federation military forces. The Aquan representatives' bioluminescent patches flickered rapidly with agitation. You're asking us to surrender command of our own ships to a species that has been part of the Federation for less than 3 months. I'm asking you to win, Chen replied. Command structure during combat is about competence, not seniority. Would you rather maintain protocol and lose or adapt and survive? Admiral Kexthor cleared his throat diplomatically. Director Chen, while I appreciate your expertise, surely our experienced officers can adapt to combat situations with proper briefing and preparation. Chen's response was to activate a training simulation that she had prepared specifically for this moment. The holographic display showed a Federation heavy cruiser engaging a single Zephyrian raider in what appeared to be a routine enforcement action. This is actual combat. Data from the first Syndicate attack, she explained as the simulation played. Federation cruiser Harmony's End versus Syndicate raider Dark Current. The cruiser had superior firepower, better shields, and a crew of 43. Watch what happens. Kethvar watched in horrified fascination as the simulation played out. The Federation crew followed standard operating procedures, attempting to disable rather than destroy, issuing warnings and ultimatums, trying to minimize casualties on both sides. The Syndicate raider ignored every protocol, used the Federation ship's predictable responses to position for advantageous attacks, and systematically dismantled the cruiser's defenses while the Federation crew was still trying to establish communication. The simulation ended with the Harmony's End disabled and boarded, its crew captured or killed. 43 Federation personnel died, Chen said quietly. Because they fought according to rules that their enemy didn't share. The council chamber was silent. Every delegate had reviewed the reports of the early attacks, but seeing the tactical details displayed so starkly made the reality impossible to ignore. The Syndicate wins because they understand something that the Federation has forgotten, Chen continued. In real conflict, the side that's willing to do whatever is necessary usually defeats the side that's constrained by what they think is morally acceptable. Dr. Harrison added his own data overlay to the display. We've analyzed combat records from 17 different Federation encounters with aggressive species over the past 3 centuries. In every case where Federation forces faced an enemy willing to use unrestricted warfare, Federation losses were catastrophic. The pattern was undeniable. The Federation's military philosophy was designed for conflicts between civilized opponents who shared basic humanitarian principles. Against enemies who rejected those principles, Federation forces were consistently outmaneuvered and defeated. Speaker Morden leaned forward in his chair, his massive frame tense with the weight of decision. Director Chen, if we accept your recommendations, what guarantee do we have that humanity won't use this authority for your own purposes? It was the question everyone had been thinking but afraid to ask. The humans were offering to save the Federation, but at the cost of placing galactic military power under human control. Chen was quiet for a long moment before responding. None, she said finally. You have no guarantee except our word and your own judgment of our character. But Speaker, you don't have the luxury of guarantees. You have an enemy that's planning to destroy or subjugate everything you've built, and you have allies who know how to stop them. The choice is yours. The brutal honesty of the response was somehow more reassuring than any diplomatic promise would have been. The humans weren't trying to deceive the Federation about the implications of the decision. They were presenting the stark reality and allowing the Council to choose with full knowledge of the risks. The vote on operational command structure was even closer than the authorization for military action. 23 in favor, 20 opposed. By a margin of 3 votes, the Federation surrendered tactical control of its military forces to a species that had been shooting at each other just 50 years earlier. As the council session adjourned and delegates filed out to begin implementation of Operation Starfall, Kethvar found himself walking beside Chen toward the Strategic Planning Center. Are you certain this will work? He asked. Chen paused at the entrance to the command complex, looking back at the council chambers where centuries of peaceful tradition had just been abandoned. No, she said simply. But it's the best chance your civilization has. Sometimes that has to be enough. That night, as Federation ships began moving toward their staging positions under human tactical command, Kethvar realized that his understanding of fear had reached its final evolution. He no longer feared what humanity might do to the Federation. He feared what the Federation was becoming because of what humanity had shown them about themselves. 3 months after Operation Starfall concluded, Kethvar stood in the rebuilt council chambers of Nexus Station, watching Director Chen prepare for what would be her final address to the Federation Council. The war with the Zephyrian Syndicate had ended, not with the glorious victory that some had hoped for, nor with the philosophical vindication that others had feared, but with something far more complex. The Syndicate was gone, its leadership dead or captured, its forces scattered to the outer rim. The Federation remained intact, its member worlds safe, its trade routes secure. But the organization that had emerged from the conflict was fundamentally different from the one that had entered it. Chen stood at the speaker's podium, her presence still commanding the attention of every being in the room despite the passage of time. She had aged during the war, stress lines visible around her eyes, a weariness in her posture that spoke of difficult decisions made under impossible circumstances. Honored delegates, she began, 3 months ago you asked humanity to help you fight a war. Today I'm here to help you understand what you've become because of that war. The chamber was silent. Every species representative knew that this address would determine humanity's future role in the Federation. But more importantly, it would define what the Federation itself had chosen to become. During the conflict, Federation forces conducted 47 combat operations under joint command. Chen continued, activating displays that showed the scope of the campaign. We destroyed 6 major syndicate installations, captured 12 key leaders, and eliminated their capacity for organized resistance. The statistics were impressive, but Kethavar noticed that Chen's tone carried no celebration. If anything, she seemed somber as she recounted the victories. But the most significant change wasn't in our tactics or technology. It was in how Federation personnel responded when faced with life-or-death decisions. Chen paused, looking around the chamber. Your people learned to fight, not just to defend themselves, but to actively seek victory over those who threatened them. The implications of that statement rippled through the assembled delegates. During the war, Federation crews had adapted to human tactical doctrine with surprising speed. More disturbing, they had begun to think like warriors rather than peacekeepers. Admiral Kexthor stood at his report station, his bearing noticeably different from the uncertain officer who had struggled during the first syndicate attack. Director Chen is correct. Our personnel adapted to combat operations more readily than anyone anticipated. Some, perhaps too readily. Chen nodded acknowledgement. The Federation Navy now has over 4,000 officers with actual combat experience. Ships' crews who have faced enemy fire and returned it. Tactical specialists who understand offensive as well as defensive operations. Dr. Harrison added his psychological analysis to the display. Post-conflict evaluations show significant changes in Federation military culture. Personnel report increased confidence, improved unit cohesion, and enhanced operational effectiveness. They also show decreased tolerance for diplomatic delays and increased support for preemptive action against potential threats. The data was clear. The Federation military had become more effective, but also more aggressive. The careful balance of diplomatic solutions and minimal force had been replaced by a pragmatic acceptance of warfare as a legitimate tool of policy. Speaker, Morden shifted uncomfortably in his oversized chair. Director Chen, these changes concern some of our member species. There are reports of military personnel questioning civilian authority, of aggressive responses to minor incidents. Yes, Chen agreed simply. That's what happens when you teach peaceful people how to fight. Some of them discover they're good at it. The blunt acknowledgement sent a chill through the chamber. The humans had warned that war would change the Federation, but the reality was more unsettling than anyone had anticipated. We have created a problem, Chen continued. The Federation now has military capabilities that exceed its civilian control mechanisms. Officers who understand warfare better than the politicians who command them. Citizens who have learned that force can solve problems that diplomacy cannot. Kethavar realized that Chen was describing the fundamental transformation of Federation society. The gentle, consensus-building civilization that had dominated the galaxy for centuries was becoming something harder, more decisive, potentially more dangerous. What do you recommend? Asked the Aquan representative, though her bioluminescent patches showed she feared the answer. Chen took a deep breath before responding. Humanity formally requests reassignment from the Federation Council. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. After saving the Federation from destruction, the humans were voluntarily removing themselves from galactic governance. We don't belong here, Chen explained. Our presence forces you to confront realities that you would prefer to avoid. Our perspectives push you toward solutions that conflict with your fundamental values. We make you uncomfortable with yourselves. Dr. Harrison stood beside his director, adding context to the decision. Human participation in Federation governance creates an imbalance. Our strategic thinking dominates discussions. Our tactical knowledge overshadows diplomatic expertise. We don't want to rule the Federation, we want to protect it. Speaker Mordun's voice carried a note of desperation. Director Chen, surely we can find an accommodation. Your expertise has proven invaluable. Our expertise is dangerous, Chen replied. Every problem looks like a military solution when you understand military solutions well enough. The Federation needs to find its own balance between its peaceful ideals and the realities of galactic politics. Chen activated a final display showing proposed restructuring of human Federation relations. We suggest a modified alliance. Humanity maintains independent status but provides military consultation and tactical support when requested. You keep your civilization. We help you defend it when necessary. The proposal was elegant in its simplicity, but Kethavar understood the deeper implications. Humanity was choosing to become the Federation's guardian rather than its guide, accepting the role of necessary protector while avoiding the temptation of control. The debate that followed was intense but brief. The Federation delegates understood that they were being offered something unprecedented: protection without domination, assistance without obligation, strength without the corruption that usually accompanied power. The vote was unanimous in favor of the new arrangement. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out, Kethavar approached Chen one final time. "Director, may I ask why you're really doing this?" Chen smiled that unsettling human expression, but for the first time Kethavar found it reassuring rather than threatening. "Because we've seen what happens when warrior cultures get too involved in governing peaceful ones," she said. "We've been the Federation's nightmare scenario, the military that becomes more powerful than the civilians it serves. The only way to prevent that outcome is to voluntarily step back. And if the Federation faces another crisis like the Syndicate, then you'll call us," Chen said simply. "And we'll come, but it will be your decision, made by your leaders according to your values. We'll provide the tools, but you'll choose how to use them." Months later, as Kethavar watched the last human advisors depart from Nexus Station, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to understand fear. He had begun by fearing the unknown nature of humanity, progressed to fearing their capacity for violence, and eventually learned to fear their clarity about harsh realities. But in the end, what he had discovered was not something to fear at all. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their understanding of warfare or their tactical brilliance. It was their recognition of their own dangerous capabilities and their willingness to constrain themselves for the benefit of others. The Federation was safer now, better prepared for future threats, more realistic about the nature of galactic politics, but it remained fundamentally itself, peaceful, diplomatic, committed to consensus and cooperation. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, human ships patrolled quietly, watching for threats that peaceful civilizations preferred not to acknowledge existed. Fear, Kethavar had learned, was not always about danger. Sometimes it was about recognizing that the universe contained forces too powerful to be fully understood or controlled. And sometimes, if you were very fortunate, those forces chose to be your protectors rather than your conquerors. Only beside humanity had he truly understood what fear meant. But only through humanity had he learned that fear could coexist with trust, that strength could serve rather than dominate, and that the most dangerous beings in the galaxy might also be the most necessary.